13th of February 2023. This Skidmark is one of those that is fairly emotional for me, and I've been walking around the whole day thinking about it, because on the one hand I grew up in a South Africa that was basically viewed as part of the West, and of course I've got a Western background, and Western civilization is part and parcel of my upbringing. But the last year things have changed a lot for me, and it was a major mind shift that I had to make, to accept and make peace with the fact that the West is actually evil. They are destructive and they are destroyers. Now, I want to talk about Aleppo and once again the earthquake there. But I want to start it off with this. For those who do not know, the Syrian city of Aleppo before the wars that destroyed Syria, that were ignited by the devils, I'm going to show you a short clip of images of what Aleppo looked like before the Americans and the West decided that they will bring democracy to it. Now, what happened to Syria is very similar to what happened to Libya and Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, currently still going on. The war in Syria is still going on. And behind it all is the West, because they did not like the regime in Syria. Now, look at this. Iraqi fuel convoys to Syria break the invader Blinken's American siege and render illegit US sanctions worthless. So in practice, the US steals the Syrians' oil to Iraq, then the Iraqis brought them back. Amazing, good work. Now I'm going to say something now that may disturb a lot of guys, Western guys, but the fact of the matter is, what the West is doing in Syria is absolutely atrocious. And apart from plunging that country into a war, the Americans occupy 1/3 of the land of Syria, and it is the area where the bulk of the oil production is and the food production. And the Americans are stealing the oil. Yes, they are stealing the oil. And in November they started stealing the grain as well. But I am also more and more convinced that the earthquake that hit Aleppo has ripped the veil off the West and revealed what they really are. They are pirates and killers, that is what they are. And what they are doing to the people in Syria is unforgivable. But the wheel is turning. The West is in deep shit. The American population is something like 3% of the global population, but they consume 22% of the globe's raw materials in some form or other. And now all of a sudden, after the Russian fiasco, the West has now found themselves in a place, America found itself in a place where they are being cut off from a hell of a lot of resources. How are they going to maintain their lifestyle? How are they going to maintain that $32 trillion debt? They can't. America is cruising for a fall. And yes, there's people that are looking at this that are now going to say, you crazy old man, they're from South Africa, you haven't got a clue what you're talking about. Listen carefully to what I'm saying to you. The Americans must get themselves in a sense, in a mode mentally, where they say goodbye to the lifestyle that they've been knowing up to now. Because that lifestyle is evaporating in front of their eyes. And that crazy fuckers in the shithouse is spoiling a fight with China, and they're spoiling for a fight with Iran, and they are seeing their asses in Ukraine, and they are now so in a fucking panic that balloon hunting has become the latest craze there. And they're trying to cover all their shit with this crazy balloon hunting. And the world is laughing at them, really laughing at them. I'm going to read to you a piece that was written by Eva Bartlett. The West's war on Syria that began in early 2011 failed to topple its elected president. But the subsequent years of increasingly cruel sanctions, all in the name of helping the Syrian people, have succeeded in rendering life miserable and near impossible, with most unable to afford to properly feed their families, much less heat their homes. Eva Bartlett knows Syria well. She goes there frequently. She's been going there since the beginning of that war. She's currently in the Donbass. Now, in a time of crisis, the Syrian people cannot even receive donations or emergency support from abroad. One supporter set up a GoFundMe campaign only to have it taken down due to the sanctions. Type the word Ukraine into the search field on PayPal or GoFundMe and you'll see countless appeals for sending money to Ukraine. But for Syrians, Western platforms like these are off limits and have been for years. On February 6, southern Turkey and northern Syria were hit by a 7.8 magnitude earthquake, followed by dozens of aftershocks and then another quake, while the neighboring countries of Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, Iraq and others were affected. The worst of the damage was in Turkey and Syria. As of February 9, the official death toll in Syria was 1,300, with more than 2,300 injured. Nearly 300,000 Syrians have been displaced due to the earthquake. The scenes initially coming out of Turkey and Syria were heartbreaking and catastrophic, with buildings collapsing in front of people and piles of rubble with dead and the maimed trapped below. In Syria, the earthquakes added to already extensive damage from the war. Aleppo, the country's second largest city, was tragically prone to building collapses because of the terrorist occupation that had lasted until 2016. The militants had frequently tunneled under buildings in many cases in order to lay explosives and destroy them, as they did with the Chamber of Industry in April 2014. With the Syrian population already struggling to just survive prior to the earthquakes, now Aleppo and the coastal regions of Syria affected by the earthquakes face even more death, injury and displacement. Even without the earthquakes, Syrians struggle to get medication, hospitals struggle to get or maintain critical machinery and equipment, and the population as a whole suffocated as the country's economy steadily worsened, all by design. According to a British journalist, Vanessa Bailey, the US and its proxy Kurdish separatist forces are occupying Syrian resources in the northeast, which includes their oil, which means, of course, that the bulk of Syria is reliant upon Iranian oil to keep any kind of electricity running. At the moment, we have basically about 2 or 3 hours of electricity per day. There is no heating in the majority of homes across Syria. Some 12 years into the proxy war on Syria, the continued denial of the very basics of emergency humanitarian relief to Syrians outside rebel-controlled areas show how little the West claim to care for Syrians really matter. The lack of concern by the UN, WHO and affiliated aid agencies for the Syrians of Aleppo, among other government-controlled areas, is not at all surprising, given these bodies over the years systematically downplayed terrorism against Syrian civilians. Now, what I want to say here is the Americans refused to drop their sanctions shit. The Europeans themselves are doing nothing. The countries that is helping in Syria is Iraq, Iran, Saudi, Egypt, Russia, China, India. Those are the countries, and there are a few more, that are helping Syria. Today, 3 planes, C-130s from Egypt landed in Damascus. And shortly after they landed, the Americans said they will sanction Egypt because they cannot use American supplied equipment to supply aid to Syria. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. And the fucking Israelis, they reckon they will bomb any aid convoys from Iran. How's that? Now I'm going to make another prediction today. The Russians are working hard with Turkey to get the conflicts resolved in the Middle East. And they are working on bringing Iraq, Iran, Saudi, and Syria to the table. And they are getting a lot of support for that move. The moment that those countries make peace between them, the West is fucked in the Middle East. The Americans will have to fucking run for their lives to get their bases and shit out of the Middle East, because between those 4 countries, they will wipe the Americans out in the Middle East. And I don't care how big a fan of America you are. There's no fucking way the Americans will be able to save themselves there. They are going to be slaughtered, because it is in the Middle East. The logistics for the Americans is going to be a nightmare. And previously, the Americans could threaten and intimidate those countries. But it has become clear now that Iran has got missiles and drones that are really potent. And with the Russians behind them, the American fleet will turn into floating coffins. The Americans need to rethink their shit. They must pack their stuff up and fuck off back to their own country and go and save what they can in their country. Their country is falling apart. But they're spending billions in bringing misery and death to the rest of the world. And that shit must stop. You must forgive me, but I have developed an uncontrolled loathing for the American actions around the world. And they are going to see their asses. That is for sure. And I'm going to close this off with this. Western sanctions will mean that more Syrians die after the earthquakes. The economic stranglehold and selective approach to aid will lead to more death and displacement. And if you are a Western taxpayer, you must think about this, because you are financing this misery in Syria. You are financing it. And I've got a message for the EU. You are very close to the Middle East. You have got a major fucking problem with energy. That is your resources. That is where you want to get your energy from, the Middle East and Russia. And you're not going to get it because you participate in these atrocities. Thank you for support. Please give me a like, and subscribe, and share the thing. Thank you.